The New Norm is brought to you by Winning at Home. I'm Steve Norman. Welcome to the New Norm. I'm learning that forgiveness is both a decision and a habit. It's both a moment and a journey. It is both a snapshot and a story. And when I read the story of Jesus, I'm reminded about how forgiveness wasn't just something that he did, it was a posture that he held. And one of the episodes that makes that clear to me is in Matthew 26, where Jesus is telling his disciples that he's going to die. And Peter replied, "Jesus, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." It's kind of a bold promise on Peter's part. "Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the other disciples said the same. Within a matter of hours, we're seeing a completely different version of Peter. After Jesus is arrested, Peter follows at a distance and enters the courtyard of the high priest. And while he's there, a servant girl says, "Hey, you're one of the guys that was with Jesus." And he says, "I don't know him." And then another servant said, "Yeah, I recognize you. You were with Jesus." And he denies it again. And then finally, the entire group confronts him. And they said, "Your accent is like a Galilean. You guys are easy to pick out of crowds. You're definitely with Jesus." And Peter denies any association with Christ a third time. And Matthew 26:75 says, "Then Peter remembered the word that Jesus had spoken, 'Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times.' And he went outside and wept bitterly." Jesus is crucified the next day, and Peter never has a chance to make this right. But on the third day, Jesus rises from the dead and appears to the apostles and tells them repeatedly, "Don't be afraid." Later, Jesus appears to the disciples again, this time in Galilee, their home base. And while Peter and his friends are out fishing, Jesus cooks them breakfast. And we read this scene in John 21. "When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?' 'Yes, Lord,' he said. 'You know I love you.' Jesus said, 'Feed my lambs.' And again, Jesus said, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' And he answered, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' And Jesus said, 'Take care of my sheep.' The third time he said to him, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, 'Do you love me?' He said, 'Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you.' And Jesus said, 'Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go.' Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, 'Follow me.'" This is the first time, at least according to the Gospels, that Jesus and Peter have a private conversation. The relationship cannot heal until they have talked about the betrayal. And in this scene, Jesus is gently confronting Peter about his behavior. Jesus names what Peter did and extends forgiveness for each offense. Forgiveness is not a real popular topic in Christian circles. We have been conditioned to frame forgiveness as a failure, as a weakness, as a shame. And yet Jesus stands firm in the field of forgiveness. He takes his stand on the mountain of mercy, and he doesn't flinch. And here's why that matters. Most of our self-defeating behaviors are born out of deep personal wounds. Find me a person whose anger is not anchored in unresolved resentment, and I'll introduce you to my pet unicorn, because neither one of those exist. I used to think of my heart as a tackle box, where I could have neat separate compartments for all of my different feelings and all of my different emotions. I could put my passion about work over here, and my love for scripture over here, and my care for my family over here, and my frustrations with this ideological group over here, and my resentments towards these former employers or these former church members or these former friends, and these all little corners of my tackle box. And unfortunately, what I've learned over time is that our hearts are less like tackle boxes and more like kiddie pools. If you were to put 98 gallons of water in a kiddie pool and then pour in 2 gallons of gasoline, you'd never have your grandkids swim in that pool. It would be toxic and unsafe. And a lesson that I'm learning the hard way is that unresolved resentment anywhere is a threat to love everywhere. Unresolved resentment anywhere is a threat to love everywhere. The scriptures say in 1 John 4:20, whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. The scriptures teach us about the importance of right doctrine. Right doctrine is seeing God and self and others clearly. But false doctrine is to see my enemies as I do and not as God does. I find it fascinating that as he breathed his last breaths, Jesus prayed this prayer for his murderers. Forgive them, Father. They don't even know what they're doing. Have you ever stopped to consider the backstory of those who wounded Jesus? These are Roman soldiers. The only language that they speak is force and violence. And I can't imagine that any single one of them got out of bed that Good Friday morning and said, oh, we're really going to stick it to this Jesus guy. They were just showing up at the office like they did any other day. They had no care or concern for whose name was on the roster. They probably didn't read or know or learn their names at all. These were just opponents to the empire who had to be eliminated. And I can recall a very specific season in my life where I'd been deeply hurt by somebody who had a lot of influence over my life, both spiritually, personally, and professionally. And I had a really hard time forgiving that individual for the things that he did that were wrong and the things that he failed to do that would have been right. And the more I learned about his story, the more I came to understand that his backstory was one of fear and shame, just as the Roman soldiers' backstory had been one of force and violence. And again, it didn't excuse his failure to act in a way that was right and appropriate and helpful. It doesn't diminish any of the very real harm that he caused me and my family through the choices that he made. But understanding his backstory gave me empathy that I did not have before. So let me ask you this. Have you ever stopped to consider the backstory of those who have wounded you? When I was in elementary school, I had to figure out how to navigate my way home because there was a neighborhood bully who would push me down and rough me up on more than one occasion. And I was just kind of resigned to the fact that that's what was going to happen. I was going to get slapped around a little bit when I was almost home. But then a couple of years after elementary school, I remember rounding the corner on the way to my house on my way back from middle school to see ambulances in the driveway and was just heartbroken to learn later that that young man, who was a couple years older than I was, had died by suicide. And it made me ask this question. What was going on in his world that made him do what he did? What fears or insecurities or demons was he wrestling with that I did not know anything about? Now, does this kind of understanding excuse the behavior of people who have deeply wounded us? No. Does it explain how they got to that place in their life? Maybe. Could it be that some of the people, including ourselves that we know, who are stalling out on their spiritual journey are doing so not because they have a drinking problem or a gambling problem or a gaming problem or a porn problem or a you fill in the blank problem? Maybe at our core, we just have an unforgiveness problem. And maybe today is the day that we decide to stand firm for our relationships in forgiveness. Matthew 18 has this great scene where Peter comes up to Jesus and asks, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother and sister who sins against me? And what's implied in the text there is not that he forgives them who sins against him once. It's somebody who keeps on sinning against me. And Peter, who is known for his dramatic flair and his bravado, says, how about up to 7 times? A friend once told me that kind of the expectation in Hebrew culture would have been that you forgave somebody 3 times. That would be you going above and beyond. And so Peter is going to double that and add 1. And Jesus answered, yeah, Peter, that's not enough. I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Or another translation says 70 times 7. And no matter how you slice it, Jesus is calling for a multiple of forgiveness when we just want to do forgiveness by addition. And it's a reminder that we're supposed to be forgiving regularly and consistently. That mercy isn't just something that we stumble across. It is a muscle that we learn to flex. I remember hearing a young woman speak at a chapel service when I was in college, and she said, I was struggling with so much anger towards my father that I made a commitment to pray for him every day. And I'll never forget what she said. She says, over time, I learned that I couldn't hate somebody I was praying for. So if you have somebody in your life or in your world that you want to forgive but just can't seem to, maybe say, God, will you forgive this person on my behalf? Maybe you can borrow that line from Jesus. Instead of saying like, Lord, I forgive this person, say, Lord, will you forgive this person? Because I don't know that they know what they were doing. And if you were to pray that prayer for 7 days, and then pray that prayer for 77 days, and pray that prayer for 70 times 7, 490 days. Do you think the way that you view that person, do you think the way that you hold that person in your heart will be different then than it is now? I guarantee you that it will. So let's take a tip from Jesus and realize that forgiveness is not a fun part of the faith-filled journey, but it's a necessary one. And if we fully lean into it, it will be liberating and life-giving in ways that we could not imagine. The New Norm is produced and distributed by Winning at Home. Winning at Home is a faith-based nonprofit committed to making individuals, couples, families, and businesses stronger through counseling and coaching. For more information, visit winningathome.com. I'm your host, Steve Norman. Thanks for listening.